Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much. I heard there was quite a lot of partying going on last night in various venues, so well done for getting here. My name is Wai Keong. I'm a hematology consultant and director of digital at Cambridge University Hospitals, where I have the privilege of leading a 200-300 strong team looking after all aspects of digital in the hospital. During my nursery runs, I am very lucky to discover a podcast called Doctor and Developer, which taught me almost everything I know about LLMs, neural networks, AI, and, kind of removing all the myths and mysteries behind it for me. So I thought, when I was asked, can you come and talk something about AI in secondary care at Rewired? I thought, I really don't want to sit and give you a PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to get people to come and do the work for me instead. So I'll hand over to the podcast host, if you like.
Hi, I'm Josh. So I've started this podcast about a year ago, Dev&Doc, and it's really driven by the need and wants of sharing kind of my knowledge as a clinician, but also working with developers to build machine learning models that are aligned with healthcare needs. I personally work as a neurology doctor, and also I run the podcast, and I'm also a very active AI researcher. So I've delivered over 40 projects, implemented different language models into the NHS. So just very happy to be here today.
Yep, I'm Vlad. I'm a research engineer working for King's College and working closely with Josh and the others in deploying, AI solutions across the NHS.
Just to say thanks so much for stepping in. So I think Josh, your usual co-host, Jelko, wanted to be here, but unfortunately had personal matters to attend to. So thanks so much for
no worries. I shouldn't be here. Anyway, glad to be here, guys.
So Josh, I was just thinking, yesterday afternoon in this stage, people were going doctors, the bake-off, doctors versus chat GPT.
Who was at the bake-off? Just can we get a show of hands, possibly?
So we've got some continuity. Do you feel threatened as a clinician?
For those who weren't here, there was a bake-off where they pitted doctors against ChatGPT for different medical scenarios. But no, I think the overarching theme is that language models are not anywhere near ready to replace doctors currently. And they looked at different domains, right? But one of the main highlights was people will use language models because there is such a shortage of workforce of doctors at the moment. So whether we like it or not, patients and the general public will actually start using language models to answer their kind of healthcare questions. And whether we like it or not as doctors, they will come to us after getting an answer from ChatGPT and ask us, what do we think? And we need to be able to address that.
Absolutely. So I did feel threatened. I felt quite reassured in some ways, but I'm also kind of looking forward to a future that I have an AI assistant to make me a safer and better doctor. But it's still kind of raised in my head, oh my goodness, what else do I need to learn to get to that place, right? Where these assistants will actually help me and not get me in trouble.
Yes.
Right? So what do we need to learn as clinicians on how to interact with these language models? Do I think of them as another human being that I need to build a relationship with and learn how to talk to it?
I think in time this will be a question of do you want to become suddenly a AI modeler, a data scientist? Because it seems that this is what we're moving towards slowly, at least for some bits in the, let's say, the health domain. What I've noticed is that prominently the major problem is, with language models at least, is the quality of data that you create the models from, let's say, and derive them, and how is this data fed into, and from what systems you can gather the data and feed it into a language model, and how much cleaning and preparation do you need to do before this is done, and of course the final step, which is after you've trained the model, the evaluation, right? Which is what you say if somebody comes with an answer from ChatGPT after they ask a question about the patient, how reliable is that answer?
And this was highlighted in the bake-off because language models are great at predicting the next word and making kind of convincing answers and sentences, right? But the reasoning part and the calculations is where it really struggled, and that's an inherent issue with the model itself and the way that it's trained. It's trained on the vast majority of the web, and unfortunately, a model that's trained on predicting the next word doesn't inherently have a good reasoning ability. So the question is, Vlad, I don't know if you want to explain a bit about this transformer model that underlies all of these language models that have recently taken over.
Yeah.
What is this architecture?
Okay, so I guess we gotta go back to the basis of the language model, which would be the transformer model, like you mentioned. We can give an example of just BERT, because that's the bidirectional encode-to-decode transformer, the most used. And without getting into super technical detail, the improvement over past neural network approaches like CNN or RNN would be that the positional encoding to the input embeddings of the transformer. So this would be the words themselves have, let's say, a meaning, the meaning being a weight of how meaningful is that word in that context. So it has a relationship with the other words, but not like old approaches which are like statistical models where you have just the probability of encountering a word. This one is just let's say a big dictionary of all the words and how they relate to each other, weighted by the context. Yeah, that's what they say, context vectors.
So
yes.
so I think what you're alluding to is this concept of attention that transformers have.
Yes.
So in 2017, they really identified this new architecture called transformers. And one of the key components is that it has this attention mechanism. So instead of, I think if you're at a busy party like last night, and let's say it was very loud, we can understand what someone's saying to us, even if we miss crucial parts of words in the sentence. And that's because we pay attention to key words of that sentence. We don't actually need every word to understand. So in many ways, transformers and this attention mechanism is the same thing. It's basically teaching the model over time. You read all this text on the internet, right? How do words relate to one another? And through learning that, you can actually understand the context of sentences, even if certain words are missing. And then you eventually develop this amazing, magical model where they found that if you keep training a model with that architecture, over time, if you give it enough data from the web, it starts developing these special capabilities called emergent capabilities that we see in large language models today. We can ask them questions, they can summarize things, they can answer medical questions. All of this is really amazing. The fact that a large language model even works and we can interact with it is essentially a miracle in my view.
I think the thing, listening to your podcast and sort of kind of conversations that I kind of have with you offline, there were kind of aspects in the development of these language models that I wasn't aware of, right? So the way I like to think about these AI models is like interacting with, imagine another human being who just happens to know a lot, right? But at the same time, they're not very clever, because I might be speaking to this AI model for the 100th time, but it has no recollection on who I am. So it still thinks I'm this average person out there that needs to, all its response is about the average, right? In some ways. And something I didn't realize was that there's a step in the development of these models where thousands of human beings actually teach these models what they prefer. Right? Is that correct? Do you want to speak to that? Because that was news to me. I remember the times when you get human beings like annotating and training models. I didn't realize that even in large language models, you still got this human aspect. Yes. And who are these humans? They're not doctors, right?
So put it this way, who's used ChatGPT or similar kind of language models? And would I be correct in saying that it's very wordy in its responses? It's very verbose. So even answering a simple question, it would give you loads of text. And that's something that was highlighted in the bake-off yesterday. For a very simple question, like, should I take paracetamol? I have a fever. It would give you pages of answers. And that's, to understand why that is and why that's a deficiency, we need to understand how the model is trained, right? So for ChatGPT, it was notorious that they hired a factory of workers spending probably tens of thousands of hours to train this model to be more conversational. So how do you do that? The model outputs 2 responses, and these people pick what's the best response. And of course, these people that are paid minimum wage to train the model, they're not experts in any field, right? So it goes to follow that as a lay human person, if an answer is longer and looks more comprehensive and answers in a very confident manner, you're probably going to rate that answer higher. So unfortunately, this kind of thing has carried through to the large language model that we see today. And we really need to ask ourselves, if we were to deploy this kind of language model in healthcare, do we need to train it in a different way? Should we actually take clinicians' time to sit there and actually do the reinforcement learning and train the model in a way that's aligned with what clinicians want?
I've heard, like in your podcast previously, like I think you mentioned about launching or implementing certain large language models in healthcare. So if you were to be designing, let's be quite specific, a large language model to help doctors like do a better job, how would you, I suppose, go about doing that? Not, like putting aside the fact that you might need millions of pounds and stuff that we don't have, but conceptually, how would you create a chat GPT for clinicians?
Oh, there's many steps.
Yeah.
But
certain, different data, is it different formula, different humans to train it?
Okay, not different humans necessarily. We still need the doctors, I guess. But the question is, after acquiring the millions of pounds which you mentioned, and assuming that's not a problem, and assuming that we don't have any computational problem as well, because I guess this is an emergent problem now, as in if you try to build your own model in the house, you don't usually, most trusts don't, at least in this country, have the resources to do so easily.
Just assume that that's not conceptually.
Conceptually,
that's the recipe
the missing recipe would be get loads of reliable data that's been properly cleansed, let's say, and then you get loads of annotators and people that are trained. I guess on the process of annotating data, I guess, or in this case, trying to perform some kind of prompt rewarding, I guess, because ideally you'd want a language model to approach to have its learning reinforced. So you've taken the human factor and tried to improve its performance with that rather. And after that, just go to evaluation.
So I think one of the main things, so we have built a proof of concepts NHS large language model, and one of our key concerns was I think what you're trying to say is how do you instill medical knowledge into a generalist language model?
Yes.
Because ChatGPT, GPT-4, Bard, they're all trained on a large part of the internet. And yes, there is medical information on the internet, obviously, but sometimes that's limited or biased. For example, there's a much higher distribution of cancer articles or neurological case reports on the web. So then the model starts becoming biased. What you would want in an ideal world is to use real-world healthcare data from hospitals to train the language model. And we actually did a proof of concepts of this. One thing we did was, so if you imagine ChatGPT or GPT-4 predicts the next word, a proof of concept we wanted to develop is whether you can use the same technology, but instead of predicting the next word, you predict the next disease in a patient. So each patient's life, it sounds a bit morbid, but becomes a sentence essentially, with the end of the life becoming the full stop. And every disease they have in between is a word. And we've shown that this works surprisingly well. We're publishing this in 2 weeks' time in Lancet Digital Health, but the results are even better than GPT-4 or ChatGPT at predicting the next disease. So this is one way in which you can incorporate medical knowledge into a language model. So you take healthcare data records, you can pre-process it or process it however you like. There's many ways in which you can extract medical knowledge from healthcare records. And then if you can put this into a language model, we believe this can really improve the performance.
That's so interesting. So in that case, you're not kind of taking kind of natural narrative text, isn't it? As the data set, you're doing like, I don't know, a series of SNOMED or ICD-10 codes or something along those lines, and predicting what the next code kind of will be.
Exactly.
But I remember listening to one of your episodes several months ago, and I think on the narrative bit, I think you also did a bit of an experiment where I think you had to fine-tune an open source language model to include notes from your hospital and stuff, and actually then ask it to like write a discharge summary or something along those lines. I can't remember what was it. But the thing that was really quite funny was the outputs were terrible.
It's gibberish.
Right?
Yes.
The outputs were terrible because if any of you have ever read an output from how doctors document, they are not that beautiful ChatGPT narrative, full of abbreviations, tables on the wrong places, spelling mistakes. So the model basically replicated poor practice. Right?
Yeah.
And I...
Yeah, so if you wanted to just generate text from healthcare records, that becomes very poor. So you need to have a method of extracting the knowledge itself and not just the words.
I think we want to say that the data doesn't have any proper structure, so we want to put some structure to it. And this is probably related to the data cleaning and, identify, well, I guess, just making sure that, let's say that the spelling mistakes can be corrected, but the rest is, well, not so much. Right.
But, this is a philosophical idea as well, but how much of our world is actually incorporated in text, right? It is a very high-dimensional installation of human knowledge. And if you think of animals or infants or babies, they do lots of things without even knowing language. And this is where a lot of the kind of purist AI researchers are moving. How do we actually build a model that's inherently intelligent beyond language? Because we don't really need language for survival, right? Animals survive, dogs communicate with each other without language, without words, without text.
There's a whole other layer.
There's a whole other layer, and you can go very deep in this layer.
I thought really this is a good time maybe to shift the conversation to a different thing. So last week, our Chancellor announced that in not this financial year, but next financial year, there'll be £3.8 billion for a digitization of the NHS. And it talks about four things. But one of the things it talks about is the use of AI to reduce the administrative task for doctors and clinicians. And kind of in my conversations with people kind of more in the know, I think they're referring to this thing called ambient
clinical documentation.
Do you think that, we talked about the kind of limitations and the unsafe things by using ChatGPT for that, but for language models for ambient clinical documentation, do you think that we're closer to that? And maybe you want to talk a bit about your experience in what is it and using it?
Yeah, should we just quickly explain what ambient clinical documentation is? So I guess at the moment, if I see a patient, the consultation may last half an hour. The documents I have to do afterwards also take half an hour. So 50% of my time is spent writing, typing up, and sending letters. So the idea is, can we reduce this administrative burden to free up time for clinicians to see patients? Now, ambient clinical documentation is a device that listens to your consultation and then essentially drafts a letter for you. So I have myself been playing with a number of different technologies. So, for example, Microsoft's Nuance, they're doing one of these clinical ambient documentations. I mean, I think it is a safe way, because at the moment we're always talking about, can we use ChatGPT to diagnose, to triage, to find diseases? But that's very high risk, and if something goes wrong, that leads to direct patient harm. Whereas you can argue, if it's just drafting you a letter, and you then essentially check over it anyway, that's fine. That's probably the safest use case currently. I mean, my personal experience using this with other doctors and role-playing scenarios is that it's still very wordy because of how we describe the architecture of ChatGPT. A lot of these technologies are also plugged into GPT-4 itself. So that's not great. You can't build a company based on another company's technology, right? Because there's many issues of that. Because number one is a power issue. You don't have the choice to build your own foundational model. But also, if ChatGPT-4 they always change the model, right? Or they might raise costs. And we don't really know how they train it. These are proprietary models. They don't give information as to how they're trained. There's like so many problems. But actually, I wanted to bounce a question back to you, actually, being director of digital. You probably make a lot of decisions about healthcare products.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like you probably got sold to a lot. Like, what do you look for in what makes a good product for the trust?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I just want to kind of, like, with ambient clinical documentation, I thought a bit like you, I've tried it. Surprisingly good, right?
Yeah.
But then I keep thinking about, like, so I imagine it like, you know, when I'm a consultant, I go on my ward round or do my clinic. If I'm lucky, I have like a junior doctor scribing for me, right? Writing and documenting my thoughts, my interpretation into text, right? So I think of these ambient clinical AI assistants as doing that.
Yes.
But then I think, you know, there is this whole interaction between me and the junior doctor that we learn each other's styles and ways of thinking. So the way it is written reflects that. I think this ambient clinical AI, they don't know me. They don't know me from a patient to patient. They never learn my style.
They can learn it if they're plugged in the EHR, right? They can see how you document. They can see
I suppose
how you order investigations.
Because I also, because a lot of us clinicians, our notes is almost like a reflection of our thinking and our personality.
Yes,
so I was like, oh my goodness, is a computer now going to be like, that's my representation of me, and am I losing something in that process? Strangely enough, I sometimes prefer the outputs of the ambient clinical outputs than me writing it, because patients talk about it sounding more empathetic, right?
Yes.
And that's because GPT-4 and stuff are, as you said, we just human beings that prefer empathetic output.
Yes.
So, and I don't know, it's just conceptually, but I'm really looking forward to it, because
me too.
The bit that I hate most about clinical practice is those aspects.
Yeah.
It's so nice to just have that eye contact with the patients and
And it probably is going to be best served in clinics where you don't have a junior doctor there scribing for you, and it's a nice, peaceful environment. I think that's where it's going to shine the most. On a busy ward round, it might be hard.
Yeah, but strangely enough, I may actually have more confidence in the AI assistant than junior doctors really writing down what I said, because, you know, we don't really check the outputs of the scribes well. We clearly do, well, we should do. Well, this is the risk, right?
Yeah.
You might end up not checking when the model gets so good because they're so confident.
That's like self-driving, right? You start trusting it more and more until it makes a mistake. I mean, people that know the technology probably would trust it a lot less.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, but you ask me, would I pay money for it, right?
And what do you look for in AI products?
So if I remember, you know, when I was, if you like, just a doctor, if you give me a tool like this, I was like, I clearly want to have it, right? It makes sense. It will save me time. I guess when I'm now in the position I am today, in some ways, whenever you want to buy a product to help you use, you go through a very similar process of whether it's what benefit are you trying to get? Does it solve a pinch point in your organization at the moment? And for most organizations up and down the country, the challenges are very, very similar. You know, in the outpatients, there are too many patients who are not seeing, not even getting their first appointment in time. And then we said that like 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 of the population of England is on some kind of waiting list, right?
Yes.
So for most organizations, and especially like in Cambridge, the board has set a strategic goal to say, the goal is we want to implement changes that will improve the access to care to our patients, right? So when I take that message, right, from the top, and when I'm evaluating like where am I going to put my money and where am I going to put my human resources, it will be through that lens, right?
Yes.
Can I say that I could save 20%, 25% of consultation time, and therefore leading to the potential of adding 2 or 3 more patients?
Yes.
Right? Because of course that's the key bit. I could save them time with people that have more coffee breaks, which may be appropriate, right? Which may be appropriate because one of our organizational goals is around looking after our staff.
Yes.
But to your point, in some ways, my evaluation of whether I want to buy something is no different for an AI tool or for a piece of equipment, right? There's a full business case, there's a benefit realization case, and in that sense, the principle is sound. I think the discipline is good, as well. So I hope that answers your question.
But what if it's the same tool? Like, I know many companies are making ambient clinical documentation tools. So let's say there's like 3 or 4 companies selling you the same backbone technology. How do you decide which one to go for?
That is a really, really good question, right? Because if you go, the process that you go out to choose things formally, that you can't just like, unlike some other countries maybe, like have dinner with the founder of a particular firm who takes you out to a nice meal and you go, I like you, I like the way you talk, so I'm going to give you that contract. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So we go through a formal procurement process by law, right? And as part of procurement processes, you have certain kind of attributes that you would judge things against. Are we as the NHS, and I think we are very good at looking at, what's the cash flow for these companies, how strong are their governance, what do they promise us in the contract, then obviously how much they're going to charge us, right?
Yes.
And all that is fine, but almost all the companies, with the except for the big ones that you talked about, are startups, right? So sometimes the procurement process will almost go like, I can't even look at them because they don't have 5 years of a solid cash balance sheet. So you have to be quite careful about things like that. But one thing I think we probably don't do very well, and that's not just about AI products, but any software products, is that company I'm going to work for technically sound? How do I know that their software and AI engineers are more academically sound and more ethically? I think that's quite hard. I don't think we do, right?
Yeah,
so when we select an EHR, we have demos, and demos are just about the user interface in front of you and functionality. But me personally, I think there's something about going, so what underlying database technology does it use? Is it old? Is it new? Would it hold me back in 5 years' time? Would match to my, and things like that, I think we don't do as well, because remember, a procurement process for software is often the same underlying procurement process for buying a hardware too. So good question, but I don't know.
I guess that leads on. Do you think clinicians and general people in the NHS would benefit from more kind of digital health education?
I think most people will say yes, right? Most people will say yes. Like,
what do you think, Vlad? I mean, you see a lot of doctors as well.
I think so. From my point, at least as a developer, what I'd say, it would be nice. For example, what we do. This is just because we work. I mean, you guys work with the university. I'm part of the university staff as well. So for us, the goal is to make. I guess in your case, when looking at the product, you say that you don't know what you're looking at. You just look at the interface, so just the front end. Well, I guess you would want some sort of transparency on the implementation side of the back end, which no one will probably, for now at least, I'm not going to say forever, but ever offer for now easily, unless they provide some sort of documentation or something that's going to be lightweight anyways, and you're not going to be able to look at the code on how these guys have trained the model, how they publish it, what's the source code for this app, which we do because all the software we do is university material, so it is open source.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about transparency. That's another thing that we, it's like we, okay, I'm going to use the analogy of another human being, right? So when I'm choosing a colleague, right, you do an interview, you go back through their employment history, you make sure that, you do DBS checks, and things like that. And so there's only, I guess in terms of human beings, there's only so much you can do, right? But in theory, say for computer code, you want to know what data, if you're talking about LLMs, what data it was trained on, the methods they use, the people they choose to fine tune. But if I understand correctly, all that's quite opaque.
They don't, I mean, big companies like Google, OpenAI, all their models are proprietary, right? Because they're for profit now. So even if you read their papers, like, Google really, I hope there's no one from Google here, but
I don't think they'll be worried that what you say would...
Okay, true. Yeah, sure. But, Google are really pushing these medical fine-tuned language models, MedPalm or Amy, the recent conversational kind of medical large language model. But you read the paper, it doesn't tell you anything about how it's trained. So, all they tell you is, okay, on the benchmark, which is passing medical exams, this does better than GPT-4.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, that's not good enough. Because, you know, even if you take the analogy of medical students passing exams, it doesn't mean you'll be a good doctor, right? So we also need to ask ourselves, maybe they need to be more transparent with how they train these models, but also the benchmark is really flawed. How we measure language models at the moment is really, really like low level. We're seeing if they can pass medical exams. I mean, that's terrible. The latest paper in the New England AI Journal of Medicine that Google published, they compared their model in case reports. Okay, so they're saying, we take 300 case reports from journal and we see if the model can predict the diagnosis. I mean, that's nothing like how we work as a doctor in the NHS.
And I suppose in case reports, the way you do when we write case reports, you're effectively already pre-curating.
All the information is there, right?
Easy to do.
The hard part is actually getting that information out of patients, which at the moment we still haven't explored really with language models. But yeah, there's a lot of things to talk about. But did you want to open up to some questions?
I suppose we're kind of like, that's right. I know, if not, we can just keep talking forever, can't we?
Yeah.
on this topic, which is always... So I don't know if someone have a mic, a roving mic, but does anyone have any kind of questions to ask us? Otherwise, we can just sit here and chat.
It's true.
Yeah.
Hi there. I'm from the TBS Secure Data Environment team.
Oh, hi.
Hi there, Kinga, Varnai.
Oh, yeah, hi, Kinga.
Hi,
yes,
yeah.
good to see you in 3D. Yeah.
So we've obviously been using electronic health record data for research for a while now. How is electronic health record data produced by LLMs or other AI tools going to affect that research? Is there some way that we can document what was produced by AI, what was written by a human? And how do you think that's going to build on itself if we use AI to produce the data and then AI to do the research on the data?
No, that's a really good question. I did read something right recently. Is that it's kind of soon the internet will be filled with AI generated content, and then we're going to use AI generated content to generate the next AI model. I don't know, Vlad, how do you solve this problem?
Well, I mean, from a hospital perspective, I guess it's easy because we know at the moment that all the data we got is human input.
Yeah, but not for long.
Well, not for long. I guess we'll have to develop something that's, I mean, most like most automated software that or whatever approaches that try to detect ChatGPT fake reports or whatever people write online these days for exams. Exams. Well, coursework.
Sometimes you don't want to. I guess you also don't want to exclude that data because the AI generated content is correct, right? Like we talk about ambient clinical documentation.
Are we talking about synthetic data? Is that what
we're just talking about?
Just training data on electronic health records.
And let's say ambient clinical documentation.
Yeah.
Like if we end up using it in 80% of our clinics, which means that note would have been generated by an AI, right?
Yes.
So then you're going to use that to train.
Yes. Yeah. So you might start getting a lot more homogenized kind of outputs from models over time.
They'll be consistent in format. Yes. Yeah. They'll tend to respect a format which will eventually become biased, I guess.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think if we keep using AI to generate our clinical documentation, over time we'll get a very homogenized DPR. It's hard to say how that will affect the data drifts, right? But that's a really good point.
But we do talk about trying to standardize clinical practice across clinics and hospitals. And strangely enough, this might be one way of doing it under, who knows?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Perfect.
Canton, orthopedic consultant. Very interesting chat. I just wondered on the note around training medical LLMs on electronic patient record data. You talked about structured data, and how confident are we that the structured data is accurate, given that the free texts that doctors write, say, treat as, or they query this, query that, which then gets interpreted by the coders into a code which may not be quite right. How confident are we with the data that it's been trained on? Because I don't personally think that electronic patient records, as they are now, are that accurate.
Yes, no, that's completely what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And you're completely right. Like, most of the clinical data is stored in free text, actually. And there are nuances in free text. So, we might say, let's treat as a pneumonia, or let's treat as sepsis, even though there's a degree of uncertainty. So that's where the clinicians really come in to work with developers. Because let's use the example of pneumonia or sepsis. How do we really know if someone's having an infection that's systemic, right? So we can look at the notes. They could say we treat a sepsis, but then you can also use the structured data, like the blood results, the chest x-rays, if there's a pneumonia consolidation you can use all of this to then reinforce your certainty that there is some kind of pathology or disease going on. And also with language models, you can understand nuances. So the model that I use for my research and the data, we have given it categories of certainty. And we can use humans to basically teach the model, okay, when we say question mark pneumonia, there's a degree of uncertainty there. We can say it may be hypothetical, or like if there's a drug reaction, if we say, it's a serious drug, if it's definite adverse reaction or could be related to this drug, etc., you can actually teach the model to understand those levels of certainty and severity. So it's really understanding the data and combining both unstructured and structured text.
I guess maybe coming back to your question is that it depends on what you want to use the models for, because I guess what I've come to really appreciate is the model will react to what data it has seen. Right. You need to, they talk about more specialized models, right? And so I guess the idea about ChatGPT is meant to be a generalizable information around language and conversations. For healthcare, I guess it depends on whether you're trying to create a specialist model or you're trying to create a general model for language that you want to layer healthcare on top. And I have no idea how you actually do something like that. But I guess that's a bit on your question. So what do you want that model to do?
But one last comment on, you mentioned, we might code the wrong diagnosis, but I've worked with numerous clinical coders, and there is a lot of variation in how they code, actually. For the same portion of text, 5 clinical coders may code it very, very differently. So even for humans, there is a large variation.
Can I share information about coding? So when they audit coding quality, what do you think is the threshold that they would use to say that there is good inter-coding consistency?
Oh, I would want at least 0.85 or more.
Okay, that's too far off. So it's 0.8, right? So 0.8 is considered acceptable. That's a new thing of learning.
Humans are different, so it's hard to get pure alignment.
I'm sure computers can do it eventually. Anyway,
yeah.
Hey, so I'm just head of data at Doppler. We're looking at AI solutions to produce administrative tasks in the NHS realm, and I'm finding that the AI models themselves, which are sort of the brain and the language of it, are very, very quickly coming along. They're available. You can use lots, but they're sort of just the brain. They don't have hands. They can't click in these very clicky systems that the NHS use. They can't log into NHS Secure Mail and send someone a mail, or at least not at the moment. So I guess the other side of some of the software, like the back-end software to then action some of those decisions or work, what would you like, how would you steer there? Like if a lot of this money from the NHS is meant to be going to administrative task automation, not really what AI does, it just gives you like the plan of what you would do if you had the hands to do so, type thing.
Oh, that's, as a neurologist, I love that, because yes, I see language models as like the language part of the brain, but there's also the motor cortex, the sensory cortex, etc. But there's a really good paper from Hugging Face where Hugging Face is like an AI company. But essentially, we're starting to move to using these language models as a central brain, and you can give it tools for it to use. So, for example, they demonstrated that, for example, doing calculations, language models are very bad at that. But you could actually teach it to just use a calculator. Or you can teach it to use Google search to retrieve the right information. Yeah. So this is the kind of the next paradigm. It's actually equipping these language models with hands and feet, metaphorically, to then actually use the tools to address their question. So you could easily use that to also click on things or automate things.
Yeah, I really like the analogy, because in theory you could ask a language model, how likely, can you please look at this patient's notes and tell me how likely they are to be discharged in the next 24 hours? And if you think they will be, can you just add a flag? And then if the flag is yes, it then goes into the EHR, puts a flag on.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean, I guess, by your hands and feet, right?
So much of the decision making, so to speak, at that point.
I suppose it is a decision making is nudging, but I guess there is a whole, knowledge out there on how do you, the way you interact with language model kind of from a software perspective is through these APIs.
Yeah.
So you send it something, you get a response, and you process that response to do something.
Yeah, you can say if this response is X, do Y. So you can't give it hands, as it were. Yeah. This is from at the back. Yeah.
Hi, Louis Ramon. I'm Director of Digital Health for Nordic. I think my question is around the framework for deployment of AI modeling in production in the patient care setting. So let's just take drug development as an example. You have clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, you got your stamp, off you go, the drug is in the market. Such type of framework doesn't exist in the AI world in the same manner. Another thing around AI modeling is, at the moment, the majority of the models are here to support decision making from the clinicians, not to replace the clinician at the end. So you still have the human validation at the end, but there'll be a point in time where you would like some of the tasks to be fully automated, perhaps. So what are your thoughts around the deployment of models live with EPRs in the NHS, and what can we start doing towards that implementation, that deployment?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I can definitely jump on that. So with the deployment, I guess it's a complex question, because first of all, you'd have to look, I think, for the medical domain, you'd have to look at some point at a generic model at the beginning, but then you might, after you discover issues with it, there's a question of what models would you want to train as specialist models, and after that, which models do you deploy for, I guess, the patient data you're looking at. So I guess, there are a couple of things to do here, and there's definitely, I guess, before you get to the model, there's definitely a precursor steps that you need to take in order to generate that model in the first place, like where do you get the data from, training it, and just I guess there's a
I would say I think you mentioned the clinical trial pipeline, phase 1, phase 2, phase 4, etc. Just because digital products don't always do that doesn't mean that should be the case, because there is a identical digital pipeline, right? Yeah. You make a proof of concept, you deploy it in the setting, you do a randomized control trial. Like there is that pipeline, but maybe not all products follow that. But I think to build a good business case, you would look for that kind of evidence, right?
I mean, those kind of evidence would be great, right? But my challenge always with, if you like, software or data-driven interventions compared to like a drug, is that once you created the drug is not going to change between phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. But the problem with software is inherently it's soft.
Yes.
You could keep improving, and as you keep improving, your phase 1 or phase 2 section may no longer be relevant. So I always think that the analogy is helpful as we see how we might transfer kind of frameworks created for drug approval to software. But after a while, it falls apart, right? And one of the reasons, to me, it falls apart, it is partly because of the fact that software is inherently soft. And I guess the other thing that makes it also harder for software is that the effectiveness of a software is often not just a function of the technology, but it's a function of how a human being interacts with it, a function of how you build it into a process. So technology by itself does nothing. Whereas a drug, as long as someone takes it or gets injected with it, you hope it does something. Whereas software is a bit more complex than that. So that's why I find like you can only go so far with the analogy of like phase 1, phase 2, phase
But
3.
I still think it's similar. Like, I think you still need ongoing evaluation. If you change the model version, you need to keep evaluating. Just like drugs long term, like, I don't know, well, the vaccine or etc. Like, different side effects manifest later on. But when you give it to a wider population for a longer period, I think
vaccine then have changed the whole.
I know they have the yellow card scheme. They have all these schemes to report back. I think you need the same with models. Like, if we change something, you need some kind of feedback.
I guess it's also a question of, sure, you might train a model in one place, but what if it's not that well performing in another place?
Exactly, the transferability is not.
Yeah.
A drug given in hospital A should hopefully work the same.
Yes.
Hospital B.
So I guess
To test this, right? You need to evaluate it.
yeah. So I guess for the data pipeline and for the model itself, sometimes the pattern does match, but it might need adjustment.
So that's the same with drugs. With different races, you have different metabolism. So you need to test
I
that.
just think that generally software evidence is just generally harder.
Yeah.
Like,
And that's
I've been involved in writing business cases for like big things like EHRs. Most people will tell you that you write a business case to make yourself feel good that the benefits will be there. But 5 years down the line, things have moved on. You know, it's not quite the same. But you hope for drugs.
Yeah.
Anyway, any
Should we take the last question?
Oh no, I'm getting that signal. I think it means time out or something. That's right. Okay.
Okay.
Well, look, it's been a pleasure. Maybe to close, I thought it'd be quite nice. Maybe how do people find your podcast?
Oh, just Google. Oh, it's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. Dev&Doc. Nice and simple.
Some people say it's very hard to find you on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, we're not on Apple.
Really?
I'm sorry.
Not yet.
Wow.
It's not yet.
Anyway, highly
We
recommend.
can't be. But
Highly recommend it, and maybe there will be other people in the audience that will be your guests.
yeah.
In the future.
Yeah, we are looking for guests, and I'm happy to chat afterwards. Yeah, if you good.
Right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
That's it.